So it's time for you to issue that audit opinion, but your client still owes you for audit fees more than a year ago. Can you issue the current year audit opinion and be independent? In other words, do those unpaid fees impair your independence? And the answer to that question is sometimes and oftentimes it does impair your independence. Now I said sometimes. So we're going to look in this video at when unpaid fees would impact your independence. We're also going to see that there's been some recent changes in regard to the code of conduct that tells us whether or not the unpaid fees can have an impact on our independence. So let's take a look at the old rules as well as the new rules and what implications they have for you. So we know that unpaid fees, whether they're audit fees or say tax service fees, regardless of what those were, if they're more than a year old, then under the old rules, you could not be independent in this current year as you go to issue that audit opinion. There's been some changes here, so let's look at the changes to see how they'll impact you going forward. As we look at this slide, we're going to see these two paragraphs. And the first paragraph tells us about acceptable levels. The second paragraph tells us when the independence threat would not be acceptable. And so let's look at this first paragraph, and we see that independence is at an acceptable level if two things are true. One, the unpaid fees are clearly insignificant, and two, they were provided less than 1 year from the date of the attest report. So let's suppose you're issuing an audit opinion today, and the audit fee from last year that hadn't been paid is $300. And let's say your normal audit fee is $35,000. Was clearly insignificant. So we know if we're looking at more than a year ago, it's insignificant. But let's say you did some tax services during this year and the client owes you $10,000. And again, this audit service normally is about $35,000, but they owe you $10,000 for current year services. Well, that's not clearly insignificant. So even if you provided these services 6 months ago, which is less than a year, and they're significant, then they would have bearing on your independence for this year's attest service. Now, let's look at this second paragraph, and it tells us another situation where threats would not be acceptable. And those would be when unpaid fees are both significant and they relate to services more than 1 year ago. So if you know, let's say you did the audit a year ago and the audit fee was $35,000, and let's say they still owe you $30,000, then the service was more than a year ago and the fee is significant, and therefore you would not be independent. Now, we see with these two paragraphs, this interpretation, that you can, in some cases, provide current year services and they haven't been paid. If that amount is insignificant and it's less than a year, then there are situations where, that does not impair your independence. So you can see really important factors here are the significance of the fee that's still owed, and then you also want to look at how long those fees have been outstanding. If they've been outstanding 2 or 3 years, then maybe you won't ever get paid. But if they still owe that amount to you it can be a problem. So you want to look at these factors to help you determine whether or not you're independent. And the factors include the significance of the unpaid fee, the length of time the fees have been due, and then look at whether or not the attest client's agreement to pay the unpaid fees exists. In other words, you have an agreement with that attest client that they're going to pay. If there's an agreement there, that helps. If there's not an agreement there, then that hurts. And then also look at the covered member's assessment of factors affecting the ability of the attest client to pay the fees. If you're, say, doing an audit and you've already noted that there's a going concern problem, they're not able to pay their fees, then that has a greater bearing on whether or not you're independent. If the client has loads of cash and it's easy for them to pay their fees, then that helps some in determining whether or not you're independent. So look at the significance of the unpaid fees, how much do they owe you, the length of time that fee's been due, whether or not there's an agreement for repayment, and then finally, you want to see whether or not you think the client has the ability to pay you. If you feel like there are problems and maybe you're not sure if you're independent, then you need safeguards in order to make sure you are okay. Now, some of the safeguards that you could use is a review by somebody that's not on the attest engagement. So in my firm, I'm the quality control partner. I review most of the A&A work that goes out the door, but I'm not involved in the audit team. So I would qualify as a safeguard. But you could have somebody, say in your firm, let's say you don't have a QC partner, then just use another partner or another manager that has not been involved in this particular attest engagement to review the current year report and file. That'll provide you a safeguard to make sure you're okay. Another thing you could do, another safeguard, would be to obtain a partial payment from the client. So obtaining a partial payment would definitely help in terms of feeling like you are truly independent. You know, the best situation is they don't owe you anything, and then all of this is a moot issue. And just as a side note here, this is a good way to collect fees from clients. You can simply say to them, I need you to pay in order for me to be independent. I can't have a loan to you and issue this audit report. Now, you want to be truthful, but in a lot of situations, if there's a prior year fee and it's significant, then yes, you've got to be paid in order to be independent. Now, the third safeguard here is to obtain an agreement with that attest client for repayment. So you may want to have a written agreement that they would pay you X dollars per month for the next 6 months. That helps in this situation. And then finally, you may just want to suspend further work. Maybe these other options aren't getting you to the place that you need to be. And so you just simply say to the client, I'm sorry, but I need to suspend this year's audit engagement until some arrangements are made. As you go to issue that attest report, you want to make sure the amount owed to your firm is not extremely significant. Now, if you're in that place where you're not real sure, then you want to look at these safeguards, and maybe you need to implement 1, 2, 3 of these. And if you're really not comfortable, then you're probably going to land down here on suspending the work until you do get paid. If you have any specific questions about this issue, you may want to run it up flagpole with the AICPA ethics body. You can email them and see what they think about your particular situation. I hope this helps, and until we meet again, take care and bye now.